Thanks for tuning into this edition of In the Studio on Friday, November 30th. I didn't have one last week for Thanksgiving break, but now that we've all finished that brief period up, here we are with one full week of classes remaining, then a partial one, and finals begin Wednesday night, Thursday, the 12th and the 13th. It's pretty crazy how it flies by, and then there's the fact that there's only one more show remaining for this semester on December 7th for me. And at that point, it'll be the most surreal feeling in the world. Basically, I will have done half of all the shows I can ever do. It's just a countdown starting, next semester until I'm off the air here on WVYC. But remember that if you've missed a show at any point during this semester, don't forget you can go online to youtube.com and search In the Studio with Keel and Tollinger and find my channel with each archived edition for you to re-listen. To start off, a small bit of sad news broke on Tuesday afternoon when it was announced that SpongeBob SquarePants' creator, Stephen Hillenburg, passed away from complications with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. Only 57 years old, but the father of one of the most, if not the most recognizable cartoon character in the last 2 decades. The show is going to be 20 years old in March 2019 already, and you might have heard the humble beginning of his, where he had an interest of the ocean and with artwork as a child, and first became a marine biology teacher. Wrote up a comic book about tidal pools, then after spending 5 years as an instructor, went on to study animation. Once the cartoon debuted in 1999, 5 years and millions of viewers later, he got a chance to direct the SpongeBob SquarePants movie in 2004, and was actually going to cancel the series and making new episodes at that point. And Stephen Hillenburg's reason for that was thinking something along the lines maybe, I cashed in on the film industry, made it big. Most television series only have about 40 to 60 episodes anyway, so let's just end SpongeBob's career here. But somebody at Nickelodeon must have told him to, pass over the creative reins and let other animators choose the course of the series. But after Mr. Hillenburg stepped down, there was just season after season for years and years, and even still the show is running. He rejoined the production team in 2015 when the second SpongeBob movie was underway, and kept working on the series even after his diagnosis in March of 2017, until he was unable to be a part of the team anymore. I think it's fortunate that he got to turn his passion into something that educated and entertained people, an uncountable amount of kids, adults too. The early episodes were for families to watch together. My sister and I enjoyed them. I think I can attest to my dad being able to sit down and see about an hour, managing to laugh. I think it's safe to say that SpongeBob is like the 21st century Mickey Mouse at this point. Just the universal cartoon character that you can reliably put on merchandise and make anybody happy. And just give it half a century like Walt Disney's old creations with his character, and people will want to pay several $1,000s for a bubble wand with SpongeBob's face on the handle or something. And that sort of gets me to another thing. SpongeBob himself, and just about every character in the series, had so many innocent, quirks to themselves that feel unique in the light of all of them being plain old sea creatures. He has his minimum wage job at the Krusty Krab. He likes his hobbies of jellyfishing and karate, has a pet, overreacts to the slightest thing. His best friend Patrick Star is lazy and a little slow, but the audience loves him. Squidward's like everyone's grumpy neighbor, and the other two are just trying to get along. I sort of have the bias in saying that the early episodes when I was in elementary school still stick out the most to me because they had some memorable lessons to learn about dealing with bullies, for instance. Or being honest about a driving test. And perhaps the thing that's endured the longest is also the quotes. I can go up to anyone in my generation and ask them, want to know what's funnier than 24? And instantly, they know the answer is 25. Everyone breaks out laughing because they get it. It's like a human connection, and that just about every kid in America knows. Same with the 2 hours later time cards, the background character who kept shouting, "My leg!" One of the things that all of our homogenized upbringings created is an elaborate system of inside jokes. It's probably the most overused phrase to say that when they don't really make kids cartoons the way they used to anymore. And when Stephen Hillenburg left the show, the new episodes of SpongeBob released from 2005 onwards felt a little like the creators were running out of ideas. The action in plenty of other modern series these days gets to be so random and unpredictable that like people our age can't seem to follow along. And things have gotten weirder, maybe a little more chaotic, perhaps violent, unhinged a little further from reality. And that's not to say that SpongeBob didn't throw some curveballs back in the day that made no sense. Like the episode where they all came ashore and became these live action puppets that were based off of what they looked like. But my thought is that these were the first instances of a cartoon like breaking the mold, being nonsensical and memorable at the same time, and now new series have to go beyond that level of what SpongeBob presented and be more flashy and crazy than the old days in the 2000s. And the gist of all this is that no show I think will ever come close to lasting as long and as impactful as Steven Hillenburg's contribution to the Nickelodeon cartoon. And where they decide to take the series next is going to be difficult either way. Like, Mr. Hillenburg is probably going to roll over in his grave if he saw SpongeBob in the modern day or something. And if the creative directors like decide to start manufacturing a close to the series of the show, I honestly think that'd be the best course of action to perhaps honor that the character belongs to somebody and isn't going to be like exploited by a corporation. Like you don't want to either jump the shark or beat the dead horse, start facilitating a descent downhill. And in the end, my generation has their memories of the show forever, an irreplaceable part of childhood waiting for dinner to finish being made and sitting on the floor, no smartphone in hand to distract us from watching. And the last thing is just kind of how influential it seems Mr. Hillenburg was for a guy who was always kind of behind the scenes, made the characters and drafted the world, but didn't really position himself at the front of his creations like a Walt Disney or a Stan Lee was. And this one quote from Steven Hillenburg seems to sum it up well. I make animation because I like to draw and create things. I have no real interest to be on camera or to be a celebrity. It's not that I don't like people, but I like having my privacy. Interesting perspective on what it means to be a maker, a designer. So after that small topic to start everything off, what else is coming up on this hour of In the Studio? How about a discussion of the question, would you trust artificial intelligence to hire your babysitter? It's a bizarre article from the Washington Post. Then the claim of a science fiction movie. Then the claim of the world's first gene-edited babies being born in China. Might have been like a mad scientist in a doctor's coat. Dictionary websites use this particular time to choose a word of the year, and hopefully I can share some of the picks and reasoning behind them, and maybe a few bits on a Mars landing, a group of General Motors plants closing their doors, and we can't forget the music and weather checks in between. But the second to last show this semester is going to be a busy one here, so let's kick things off with a song. Next up is the group Balance and Composure with the track titled Body Language. You're listening to 88.1 FM WVYC, and you'll be back with me, Keelan Tollinger, in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. That was Balance and Composure with Body Language, and I think now is a good time to get the first weather check of the hour out of the way. So currently at York College of Pennsylvania, and if you're a frequent listener of my show, you've probably heard a couple of topics now that discuss technology and how it affects modern American society. Like with my big speech on the artificial intelligence systems that drive what YouTube suggests you watch next, and how that sparked a trend of children's videos where people would film monotonous things with a robotic lack of creativity, just so this virtual algorithm would pick up on words or content and basically just shove them in the direction of a young viewer and say, here, look at this and this and this next. This new technology software designed for computers and smartphones made the news for supposedly harnessing artificial intelligence for babysitter screening. And so, like, if you want to make sure a potential hire is genuine, even after you conduct a police background check, a face-to-face interview between the sitter and the parents, or like a review website online, this company, the name's Predictum, like the word predict, IM, offers a service that lets a parent begin a search of a potential babysitter's name and automatically scan through their entire history of social media. So that means their Facebook, their Twitter, their Instagram, And once the algorithm, the little invisible robot, is done checking every word the person has written, it delivers to the parents a score. It's like a level of risk from 1 to 5. Has the person ever posted statements that could be considered bullying or harassment, anything disrespectful to authority or a bad attitude in general, sexually explicit content as well. The Washington Post writes that Predictum is kind of like this private investigator summarizing service, but one of the problems is that nobody has any idea how this artificial intelligence's algorithm actually works. This article writes that a Predictum scan starts at $24.99 and needs a babysitter's email address, and also they're okay to access all the social media accounts of theirs. So in some cases, a person can refuse to go through the check. But then Predictum will come back and say the parent won't be able to hire them until the request is completed. And that's practically a goodbye and have a nice day, you're hiding something kind of claim. Everything Predictum finds is also known only to the parents, and they don't have to share the results. And this kind of technology is actually being considered for use in other settings like resume screening. An artificial intelligence company like Predictum could offer its services to help a big corporation dive through the social media of potential employees for any troubling signs. It could scan the text of thousands of written applications coming in and highlight the clusters of phrases that the job offering is looking to see. There's an example here of a firm called HireVue. Hire is in employee hire, that offers a service to break down a videotaped job interview and is able to listen to an applicant's tone of speech, their choice of words, and the expressions of their face to predict how their personality will be on the job. If it sounds impossible or scary, it kind of is to me too. I could be a guinea pig for a company trying out these technologies to be smarter. And I don't know, catch me on things. I mean, I'm safe enough, but I can already tell that before I'm hired, someone's going to comb through my Facebook. But I'd rather prefer that than basically a machine doing it at light speed. And because Predictum, and all these other technology firms still haven't obviously perfected the guessing power of their artificial intelligence. The chief and co-founder of Predictum himself, his name's Sal Parsa, even said that the ratings of this software, quote, may or may not reflect the sitter's actual attributes. It's not even guaranteed that this $25 scan is sure of itself when it's taking words out of context and there isn't a human element to the judgments. So this is kind of like YouTube's problem that I remarked on last month. Algorithms can only look at a likely set of words or phrases that mean good things or bad things. And look at it this way. It's mostly teenagers who are trying to fill babysitter jobs, so nobody's typically older than 21 years or so. Their Facebooks and Twitters have been around since middle school and high school, and have probably gone through the age of drama and years when these people weren't even thinking about the social media accounts reflecting on their adult lives. For an algorithm to go back to the beginning of time with these profiles and dig out a status post along the lines of I hate driving in the winter. The nature of these algorithms that experts are worrying about is that it'll only see the words I hate and put up a red flag saying this person occasionally posted aggressive speech. And the major problem is that in Predictum's case, it doesn't really give you the option to debunk it yourself. You can't go in and look at the whole statement about driving in the winter. It just remains as a false positive. So while it's supposedly making research easier for parents, so they don't have to comb through hundreds of things individually, even boiling things down to simplistic parts doesn't tell the whole story. But this doesn't even explain the half of it, as to what's the problem with Predictum. A follow-up article was published on Tuesday of this week by the Washington Post that Facebook and Twitter wanted to examine how this service is dealing with a user's surveillance and privacy. What these two websites did soon after this first article was published was take away some of the access that Predictum has to all the user information out there. Apparently, it doesn't even seem to affect this company in the slightest because, quote, we had decided to source data from other means. I imagine they're working with another company that's legally paying for access to Facebook and Twitter's data on its users in the first place, if that makes sense. Because these restrictions on Predictum are said to be in place so that Facebook and Twitter can protect the information and privacy of everyone using the websites. But to me, I think they're upset at the fact that this third party gets to charge parents $25 for a scan that's basically another company's property. And what this all amounts to is just a struggle to figure out who gets to own and use the data. And while social media and the technology companies are fighting over that, they're both basically trying to deploy artificial intelligence on all of it to make it work for other businesses and groups of the public. And where to lead, I have absolutely no clue. Like I said, I have a feeling I'm going to be one of those test subjects under really careful scrutiny if a business wants to tell a service like Predictum to go and pat me down, or have HireVue study a recording of my job interview. What's a bit regrettable is that the more common these practices are on a larger scale, the less need there is to have a human element to the people being managed here. When I talked about the algorithm of YouTube, James Bridle, the key speaker, put it best that folks even have to behave like machines to get the most work done, to behave within the demands and preferences of the machine. And I'll tell you that I'm not going to scroll through my 5, 6, 7 years of using Facebook and go through the trouble of deleting everything, because there's no way I can predict what the algorithm is going to assume is offensive. And ultimately, the question that society needs to figure out the answer to is, if we're using these technologies responsibly, being mindful that it might be biased in some ways, and not turning our search for better information from the aid of computers into something basically fueled by profit. That's about the extent of it. We have reached about 3:21 in this hour here at WVYC. Let's get you back to the music. Next is a song from Hazel English titled Love is Dead. You're listening to 88.1 FM, and I'll return shortly. Welcome back to 88.1 FM, WVYC. That was Hazel English with Love is Dead. And this next topic is something in the sciences that I don't really grasp as easily as modern technology these days, but I'll give it a shot anyway. Because for the past couple decades, scientists and doctors have been hinting that as we understand the field of human genetics further, we're understanding the composition of our DNA, all the codes essentially lying in secret that can basically create your traits. The diseases you're vulnerable to, the mutations that can cause cancers. It's like looking at a weather map to predict the conditions 30, 40, 50 years down the line. And at this point in time, it's fairly common for people with a family history of a serious illness to get their genes studied. I think for breast cancer or pancreatic cancer, it happens somewhat commonly. It helps to find the signs that exist in the composition of our microscopic cells and say, like, prepare. You're at risk, like, would you want to undergo a double mastectomy knowing this? And the theory has become, if you can see what parts of genetic code cause this and that problem, is there any way to change the course? And maybe not when you're already born, it just becomes a matter of preventative actions then. But it could be possible to alter an offspring of yours, make it so that future generations won't have to deal with the fear of a particular cancer. But in the last week, the first step in modifying the genes in unborn babies was suddenly taken. So the CNN and the New York Times each featured this article about researcher He Jiankui, who announced to the world he claims to have altered a gene in a pair of embryos, implanted them into the mother's womb, and now they've been born this month, a pair of twin girls. The first genetically edited babies. And now it's time to slow down a little bit, because right now there's a lot of questions to answer. So He Jiankui so far hasn't published any research, shown any proof from what it seems. No photos of the babies, only that he claims to have done it. It might have been possible given the apparently powerful technique out there to alter genes. This method is called CRISPR, like the adjective without the letter E. But instantly there's been an outpouring of backlash rather than celebration or a sense of accomplishment. I think that's fair, because like scientific experts were just worrying about the day for years when reliable gene editing in unborn kids would arrive. Kind of like the self-driving car's eventual invention, only this is a little more ominous. People concerned with human ethics and public policymakers just fear when it becomes normal to swap out bits and pieces of genetic code to guarantee things like eye color and IQ and height and perhaps skin tone, maybe the complexion of the body to be more athletic. Designer babies, like they're afraid of being manufactured like a car or a custom cake for a wedding or something. And GNQE wasn't doing something particularly as cosmetic as that. His goal when modifying these specific embryos was to prevent HIV infection. He basically disabled the gene in a human embryo called CCR5, and by turning that off, a cell can't make the protein, like the gateway, that the virus needs to enter a cell. It's a preventative cure, and supposedly it was so important to have a countermeasure to HIV like this because people who possess it in China have to deal with severe discrimination. So it's like he went ahead and did it to propose one of the newest reliable treatments. But still, nobody seemed to have imagined that this was coming. There wasn't a team around him, nobody watching him for ethical treatment. 122 Chinese scientists issued a statement calling this work crazy and a blow to the global reputation and development of Chinese science. The hospital the procedures took place in says they've denied being involved and have to investigate records for fraudulent details. And while it's not against the law in China to edit the genes of human embryos, here in the US and a couple other nations around the world too, it's outright illegal to alter them specifically for the things that could possibly go wrong, and the implications of playing God. Right now, from what GNQE is claiming, the two girls are healthy, but what if some of the genes have been screwed up in the process? The most bizarre thing to me is that this same scientist was presenting his findings at a New York conference just this August to show that he manually disabled the same CCR5 gene in a group of 9 different embryos. But those were in lab dishes or something. He never said that one of these were implanted in a woman. Someone must have already been carrying a genetically modified baby when he was talking at this conference in August. And now that we've arrived at this point, there's no stack of medical papers or sheets of data to suggest that this whole thing has been carefully monitored every step of the way. And that's a problem. I'll come back to this topic in just a bit, but it seems we've hit the half-hour mark. Let me quickly tell you what WVYC, the voice of your college, wants you to know. So now my question is, was his heart in the right place wanting to do this procedure? Was it smart for him to do this just for the advancement of medical science in the face that most experts in the world would tell him it's a bad idea? This guy at least seems conscious of what he did based on his interview with the Associated Press, where he claims he wanted genetic editing for valid reasons, like counteracting HIV. This quote reads, "I feel a strong responsibility that it's not just to make a first, but also make it an example. Society will decide what to do next." And I don't know if that's going to mean jail time, but maybe tighter regulations on a doctor's tools in the future, at least abroad. But part of me wonders if this even happened and it's just some kind of stunt, but you just never know without proof. It's just that there might be now 2 members of the global population with altered genes, and that's going to take a lot of carefulness to first study for any defects developing over time, and secondly, control. Society has to keep tabs on how these 2 babies are going to grow up and reproduce as adults. And any further generations adds in an artificial layer to the human gene pool, basically. And I honestly saw issues and this, and cause for concern coming when you just consider if there's going to be modified people someday in everyday life, like the self-driving car. What does that mean for the other side of the equation which doesn't have any changes? What happens if they mix? Will there be a social hierarchy? A new elite that can afford or has the privilege to pick and choose parts about their offspring. And the babies can't even choose what genes will be swapped out or taken out. It's ultimately just crazy to think about, I have to admit, and there's not much more to it I can add than that. And we'll see how the world reacts to these sorts of developments if they happen to be true. But that gets us to about 3:33 here at York College of Pennsylvania. Time for another break from the station here at 88.1 FM WVYC. I'll return very shortly with a brief look at the words of the year chosen by the internet's most widely used dictionary websites up next on In the Studio. Stay tuned.
Here is an important message from WVYC, the voice of your college.
Attention campers. Remember, this is killer bee season in the Northwoods, so don't provoke any flying yellow things. You're just asking for trouble.
Luckily, we're far from the North Woods in York. Listen on air at 88.1 FM, online at wvyc.ycp.edu, or at tunein.com, or with the TuneIn app.
All right, welcome back to 88.1 FM. My name is Keelan Tollinger, so I'll ask you this brief question. In one word, how would I describe the year 2018? I'd call it fleeting. You might call it chaotic, messy. But around the 12th month in the calendar, like these dictionary websites that are out there like to release what word they think encapsulates the year. And there's two interesting picks that I wanted to particularly talk about. So dictionary.com, a website that's been around for ages, serving up most of the definitions if you ever were to search a term you're unfamiliar with online, they've chosen misinformation. It's a little different than, say, fake news, although it might sound the same, but it really isn't related. Donald Trump's fake news is whatever complicated information he doesn't agree with or doesn't believe. Misinformation is defined by false information that is spread regardless of whether there is intent to mislead. Now, there's actually a very fine distinction between this word and its cousin, disinformation. Disinformation is defined as deliberately misleading or biased information, manipulated narratives or facts, simply propaganda. The difference between misinformation and disinformation is basically intent. Like if you're a person who produces articles with fake claims, create photos, memes, all that stuff, and publish it online as news or social media, that's disinformation. That's the origin of real fake news. And if you come along and see the disinformation, believe that it's real, and share it along to your friends and neighbors, you're being a spreader of misinformation. Disinformation deceives, misinformation misguides. I hope that makes sense. But it was kind of interesting to me how this particular word of the year has transformed when it's apparently been documented in use all the way back in the late 16th century, like the 1500s. Today it's evolved to describe the common habit on social media for people to read and pass along the first thing they see, like whether or not they believe it's humorous or actually backing up their personal or political stance on an issue. And this word couldn't be more relevant when we talk about things like Facebook scandals this year, with Cambridge Analytica, which gathered up the personal data of people to create a profile of them. And it was only this year that Congress really unmasked the website and blamed it for the fake political ads in the 2016 election. Or the thousands of bots pretending to be Twitter users and sharing articles with disinformation in them. Conspiracy theories, the president being the spreader of misinformation himself whenever he repeats debatable facts of his. But to change course, the Oxford English Dictionary, which is also online, been in use for decades, and print copies, I think found an equally important word in this year's current span. They decided to choose toxic. The word for being poisonous, having been poisoned. And they've been around, like this word has been around since the medieval times as well, and Oxford picked it up because it was searched up 45% more in this year alone, and started to be transferred into a variety of different contexts. So, a descriptor for different nouns that kept appearing in the news. So, a toxic chemical, toxic masculinity, in regards to Supreme Court Judge Brett Kavanaugh's hearing. Toxic substance, toxic gas, perhaps in relation to the Syrian civilian attacks, and the Russian agents who supposedly poisoned that ex-spy in Britain. Toxic environment, like a job environment where coworkers are a detriment to you. Toxic relationship, like one half of a couple hurting the other emotionally. Toxic waste, toxic air regarding pollution. Toxic algae, like what Florida had to deal with around their shores during the summer. Like, this word really got a fair share of use this year in a bunch of different contexts. I think it totally deserves its status because it's helped the public identify like problematic trends in the modern world. Now, I believe there's a risk in perhaps overusing a word like toxic, so much like a phrase such as fake news can become overkill and loses its meaning. But regardless, from the standpoint of these two resources, understanding what the public is talking about, what they're searching for, they hit the nail on the head when it comes to picking these, I think. And it'll be interesting to see if the word in 2019 is something being repurposed or like a newly coined term to capture what the millennials are doing. We will find out. But that's about all the time I can spend on this particular topic. We'll be moving on to some more music right about now. Coming up next from Prawn, off a collaborative EP with Joie de Vivre, a song called Why You Always Leave a Note. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and I'll be right back with a whole host of interesting stories in the news to coast out this hour of In the Studio. Stay tuned. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of York College. That was Prawn with Why You Always Leave a Note. And my name is Keelan Tollinger. It is about 3:43, so we're going to do the second weather check of the hour right about now. So currently at York College of Pennsylvania. And next I'm going to do something a little different for the last segment, like the last segment that I'm talking for, and try to combine a couple of topics into one. So there were just a couple of small stories that I don't really have the time to discuss as much as I'd like to, but at least make a bit of a mention of each of them for a few minutes. So perhaps next semester, if I wind up doing this on another occasion, I'll have a clever title for a section like this and maybe some kind of neat intro music. But anyway, last week, an Irish soccer player was surprised to learn that his former team announced that he died. The 29-year-old man, Fernando Lafuente, said he was alive and well, although the team he used to belong to, this is Ballybrock Football Club, put an obituary in the local newspapers a day before their next game last Saturday. And Lafuente was apparently killed in a car accident when really he was just no longer on the team because he had moved to a different town in Ireland to work as a software engineer. But somebody, for some reason, at this Ballybrock Football Club just did not want to play an opponent on the weekend and decided, you know, the best course of action is to come up with an extreme circumstance why a player isn't on the team anymore. And it did get their game canceled, and it made the other teams about to play their matches have a minute of silence before kickoff, and every team captain around their league wore black armbands in honor of this guy. And Lafuente didn't even know until Tuesday that he was all over the news and had to call his family and let them know that he was all right. On the plus side for him, now he's a bit of a local celebrity and has offers to play in other teams and stuff like that around his current area of Ireland. The townspeople started to make Facebook memes of him rising up out of a grave or something. And in the end, Lafuente isn't going to press charges, and whoever made the PR decision in the first place has been fired. Good call. But yeah, you try calling off of work with an excuse like that and see where it gets you. Other news includes the new and successful mission from NASA to Mars. The InSight lander managed to get through the atmosphere with its heat shield, deploy a parachute, and fire a set of dozen rockets to touch the ground just delicately enough. Just the other day, it unfolded its dishes of solar panels, so now it is a fully functioning lander for its entire 2-year stay on the red planet. Unlike the Curiosity rover, which has been wandering around the landscape in search for the presence of water and other signs of microscopic life every day since August 6, 2012, InSight is instead a small kind of station that won't move except for a few arms. And I think what the scientists are waiting for now is a scan or photos of the lander's feet, so that back on Earth they can shape the ground in a laboratory as a rocky imitation sandbox and simulate where and how to start digging into the Martian floor. Basically to keep making assessments on whether the planet is sustainable for eventual human exploration. Something that I think will be so cool if they can just manage to do it several decades down the line. Get a person on another planet, start an interspace colony. Right now the plan is to just dig over 15 feet into the ground and monitor Marsquakes. You can even look up a few articles online of the photos that InSight has taken so far of Mars's landscape. It's essentially just like a tan, featureless desert that's all made out of stone with the occasional cracks or uneven bumps in the ground. It's pretty much a giant stretch of Pennsylvania roadway on a planetary scale. And finally, in this rapid-fire series of topics, a General Motors company announced it was going to reduce its salaried workforce by 15% and cease production at 5 plants, somewhere 14,000 to 18,000 people affected, either laid off or reassigned. People immediately started aiming blame at President Trump, saying, "Oh, what happened to all the jobs that you were supposed to make? I thought car manufacturers were your friends." The president, of course, freaked out on Twitter and threatened to remove any incentives that the company receives for making electric vehicles, and maybe put tariffs on them, on the company. If everyone just slowed down a little and thought about the logistics of the layoffs for a moment, like the company grossed $7.9 billion in 2015, $10.6 billion in 2016, and then $10.7 billion in 2017. They're far from in the red, so what could be the problem? And an article from Forbes that I read actually called this a strategic decision from what it seems like. This company isn't trying to make thousands of lives miserable. They at least somewhat tactfully offered buyouts to their employees. But this new motto of theirs, zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion, that's a slogan for self-driving electric vehicles, which to me appear like it's the way of the future. My generation would certainly like to have more access to vehicles that don't have to run on gas, I would think. And the trend that consumers are making clear is that sedans aren't quite as popular as SUVs, hatchbacks, crossovers either. So most of the General Motors' closings affect this shrinking sedan production line. If a plant isn't going to operate at full capacity, that might as well be a more of an emphasis on cutting edge things. And I think the most prominent fact is that GM stock actually rose by 5% on the day that it announced the cuts. So yes, ultimately there's going to be a big wound in the market from the layoffs, with the plant workers and local businesses surrounding them and the housing market, but we shall see in the long run whether it's the strategic move that Forbes is calling it. I'd like somebody to compete with Tesla's founder Elon Musk and unseat him as the king of electric self-driving cars, because he's kind of a weirdo. With that being said, I guess that's all I've got for this lightning round of topics, and let's take another song break, and I'll be back momentarily to close out this hour here on 88.1 FM. Coming up next is the Scranton, Pennsylvania musician Petal, and her song off her new album Magic Gone. It's I'm Sorry. Stay tuned here on WVYC. I'm Sorry by Petal on 88.1 FM WVYC. That will just about wrap it up for me in the studio for this week. If you're interested in hearing any of it again, don't forget that over the weekend I work on editing and uploading my show to youtube.com. That's a channel you can find if you search up In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger. I typically get these shows online before the next work week rolls around. I've got one last remark to make, and that's kind of like an addendum to something I closed out a broadcast last month about No Shave November. Since tomorrow's December 1st, it's time to shave my facial hair again. It was nice being lazy while it lasted. Honestly, there weren't many people I came across curious as to why I was changing things up. That could either be because word's been spreading about what guys are up to this month, or maybe it's just that a mustache and beard are quite just very non-earth-shattering things. But whatever the case, I was actually pretty surprised to see that someone was discussing their open skepticism of how much help an awareness event like No Shave November could actually be on the male population. So this person was from Brazil. They were Brazilian. They were posting online that they didn't ultimately see the point in this organization, this holiday of sorts, and for a moment it made me stop and think about the purpose too. So ultimately, the Movember Foundation's mission is to spread awareness of men's health issues that lower their life expectancy as compared to women, like prostate cancer. Well, the stranger seemed to scoff and say then, what's the reason you donate money away when all you should be doing is spreading the word? And I guess the response to that would be action. Because down the line, 2 or 3 decades from now, I would hope that as the money from donating to cancer treatment centers, to foundations, spreading awareness of the disease, it would have funded some cures to make this innocuous act in the present pay off in the future. I, for instance, wrote a message back to him in response saying to the stranger that other men's problems like suicide from depression are also issues that could be talked about in this light and known, so there's a more organized front to combat them. And really, the most disappointing thing to me was his reply back that here in Brazil, we don't have any reason to talk about something like that. Like, every man here in my country knows what they need to do to stay alive and healthy. At that point, I was just like, well, what can you do? There's a cultural gap to movements like these, I guess. And whether or not they're needed is ingrained in the current generation and its trajectory, I guess. So long story short, I couldn't really convince the stranger, but I've done my participation anyway, and hopefully it amounts to something, either in this country or gradually around the world. But from this small station here in York, Pennsylvania, thanks for joining me this afternoon and kicking off your weekend. I hope you can tune in again for the final show of the semester here on 88.1 FM WVYC. Once again, my name is Keelan Tollinger, and I will see you again at 3 o'clock on Fridays. To leave off, here is Hippocampus and their song Bambi. Take care, everybody.